Hello and welcome back to On the Grid Podcast, Season 5, Episode 10. We are back reviewing the Chinese Grand Prix. So in this episode, we'll just be going over our 1 to 10 driver ratings because there is a week's break. There is a week's gap, unfortunately. We've got into the swing of things, haven't we? 2 weekends on the spin. So next week, we'll review all like the news bits, all of our predictions, and then look ahead to the Japanese Grand Prix because it's looking like there might already be a driver switch to come. But more to come in the next episode. So for now, we'll go through our driver ratings and we'll kick things off with the man of the moment, Oscar Piastri. So he qualified for the sprint in third and finished second. Qualified on pole, getting his first pole position in Formula One in actual qualifying, not in the sprint race. And then finished first. I've gone for a 10 out of 10. Nice way to kick things off. I thought it was a very, very good performance. He looked to have the measure of his teammate throughout the entire weekend. He was quicker than Norris in every single session. And in the race, he held him at arm's length. Norris didn't really put up too much of a fight. Obviously, he had that issue towards the end of it, but the result wasn't going to change regardless of that. So 10 out of 10 from me.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. When it came to the whole of a Chinese Grand Prix weekend, I didn't catch most of things because I was at work, unfortunately, and with the early time, it meant that I sort of kind of had to watch everything on kind of on replay and kind of highlights. But from what I saw of Oscar Piastri, he was very good, very very good. He obviously got his first pole position in like proper Grand Prix qualifying, as you said. Had the measure of his teammate, and I think he from the two McLaren drivers, he was the stronger driver this weekend. Obviously, he had the bad luck in Australia in his home race. Not last week, but like we mentioned, he kind of rectified his mistakes and got maximum points on race day when it mattered. So yeah, I'm inclined to agree to it.
Yeah, I for one actually caught most of this weekend. The only thing I missed was practice and actually the first half of the sprint because randomly on Saturday morning I woke up at about 20 past 3 in the middle of the night and thought sprint's on. I might as well watch the last half of it. So I actually caught the last half of it. It was a great little battle between Piastri and Verstappen. I might be over egging it because I was, like I said, half asleep. But it looked to be a good battle, and then Piastri got the better of Verstappen, but didn't have the tyres to catch Hamilton.
Yeah, like you mentioned, I you probably watched most of this race weekend. The only thing that I caught was actually the sprint, because I initially went to a friend's house and I didn't end up coming back till about two in the morning. So I just stayed up and watched the sprint, the whole entirety of it. And obviously, we saw what happened with one of our Ferrari guys and Lewis Hamilton in getting the victory in the sprint. We'll obviously talk a little bit later on about what actually happened to the two of them in Grand Prix racing. But yeah, the only thing that I caught was the sprint, and obviously Oscar Piastri and Max Verstappen did have a little bit of a ding dong battle. Yeah, again, I think we're over exaggerating it because it was 3 half past 3 in the morning. So we could be over exaggerating it because of how tired we were. But yeah, it was the sprint. The sprint was exciting, purely down because of the gaps that were between all of the drivers. But if it wasn't for the gaps and how close they were, I don't think it would have been exciting. But from reviews that I've heard of a Chinese Grand Prix, it wasn't exciting at all. It was actually quite dull. You could probably tell me different, Ethan, but from reviews that I've heard online, the race itself wasn't fantastic. So the sprint probably was the most exciting thing that I saw, and I'm glad.
Yeah, no, it wasn't an all-timer, was it? The Chinese Grand Prix. I think it looked as if it was going to be sort of this like drawn out, slow burner, and then come alive at the end, and then that just fizzled out completely. There was a couple of good battles. Doohan versus Hadjar was a great battle. Even if some of the defensive driving there was a little bit over the top from Jack Doohan. And then I think there was, like I said, there was a couple of battles between Leclerc and Verstappen. That was an interesting one. It's always interesting when those two are next to each other on track, but not an all-time classic by any means. It didn't help that obviously my guy was slipping back and slower than his teammate who had half a front wing. So that wasn't ideal. But moving on now to second place man, Lando Norris. He qualified for the sprint in sixth and finished eighth, only claiming 1 point in the sprint. Qualified for the race in third and finished second. I'm in two minds about this, and I'm going to change my mind at last minute. I'm going to give him a 7 out of 10. I thought it was a pretty poor performance. He, at the end of sprint qualifying, he didn't get his lap in. He made a complete mess of the final hairpin, which completely ruined his lap. He didn't even finish that lap, and then lost places at the start. Just about recovered to get 1 point, and then again qualifying in for the Grand Prix wasn't ideal. It was messy yet again. So he could only manage the second row, wedged between, Russell ahead of him and Verstappen. And then after the round of pit stops, he actually came out behind Russell. I think that was a little bit of an undercut there from Mercedes, working it quite well, knowing that they would have to pit Piastri, which gave them the advantage. He managed to claim that position back and was actually very, very lucky to get second place because of obviously that brake issue at the end, which isn't his fault. But one more lap and Russell definitely would have claimed second place. So a messy weekend from Norris. And we talked about after Australia, maybe this was a new leaf for Lando Norris. Starting the season fresh, got two back-to-back wins for the first time in his career from Abu Dhabi at the end of last season, and then from Australia. Couldn't make it three in a row and never looked likely of doing it either. A pretty poor performance. So I've got to give him a 7 out of 10. I can't give him any higher.
I've actually given him an 8. I think that obviously we've obviously done these ratings for a while now, and I think that we sometimes when we're talking about the sprint, we've got to take it with a pinch of salt. And I'm doing exactly that with the sprint, and I'm looking purely on the basis of his qualifying and his race performance. Yes, he should be qualifying in third. Realistically, McLaren have a quickest car. He should be qualifying on front row week in, week out because of the quality of the car. He qualified for third. Okay, by all means, he's had to do some work. And he did the work and he got second place and he finished obviously behind quite a bit behind his teammate. Okay, that's fine. With the sprint, I think the McLaren's strategy when it came to sprint qualifying, especially SQ3, wasn't optimal. And they left it very, very late with their laps. And I believe I want to say they only did one run in qualifying in sprint qualifying, or it might be two runs, but their second run was left very, very late. And obviously that's what inevitably saw McLaren and sort of Lando Norris panic, and saw Lewis Hamilton be the beneficiary of it and claim sprint pole and the sprint victory. So by all means, there's obviously this and that when it comes to Lando Norris in China, but he rectified his mistakes in qualifying in the race. He got a much needed podium. He's still the championship leader. And if it wasn't for obviously his poor kind of showing in sprint qualifying and the sprint, obviously we'll be talking about probably about a 9 out of 10 because realistically, if your teammate's winning and you're not putting much of a fight up, you're bound for a 9 out of 10 at least, because obviously we're not going to give you the same as your teammate. So it's a mixed bag, like you mentioned. But I think Lando Norris can be as happy as he can be because he's still the championship leader. He's gained valuable points in the championship. And obviously he's gained a second place and another podium trophy to his name. So I've gone with an 8, just one grade higher than you, but I think that it's probably saying that he had a poor showing in the sprint and sprint qualifying. He rectified it in the race.
I do hear your point about the sprint. I think it was a compound of errors. So obviously they've done two runs compared to one. Everybody else done one in the third part of sprint qualifying. My issue with that though is that his teammates qualified third and he's qualified sixth, which on the face of it isn't awful. But then he's dropped 3 or 4 places at the start, dropped out the points, and then he's lost 6 points in the sprint as well. And he had a 23-point lead over Oscar Piastri after Australia. It's now 10 points. So you think that's a massive, massive margin to close in, especially when he's finished second in the race. So I think if this championship battle does go all the way, and you even bring some of the other cars when they get their everything together, like the Red Bulls really haven't hit form at this point. They've still got to figure out a lot of what's wrong with their car. The way the Mercedes can take another step forward, whether Ferrari can take a step forward as well. It might not. It's weekends like this, so you need to be at least getting a podium in the sprint, I think. But moving on to George Russell, he qualified in fifth for the sprint and finished fourth. Qualified for the main race in second and finished third. Now, this is what I'm talking about maximizing your performance. I've gone for a 9 out of 10 because he was utterly fantastic. He's really taken this leadership step in his stride at Mercedes, and he has become a team leader, and he's doing a fantastic job. 2 podiums back to back, and you've got to say he's full value for it as well. Could have been better, like we said. I think I'm a little bit confused as to why he wasn't pushing a little bit earlier, because for a few laps they were talking about brake issues for Norris, and then it was only until there was major issues that Russell started pushing. He only finished like a second and a half or 2 seconds off Lando Norris in the end. If Mercedes can find a little bit extra performance, they could be challenging for victories with George Russell. I do think he'll get a couple of victories over the course of the season. He's an outside bet for the championship if you really want to, if you're brave with your money. So I think a brilliant performance from George Russell, and more of the same to come.
Yeah, I agree with you on a 9 out of 10 for George Russell. And like you mentioned, Toto Wolff actually mentioned that he thinks that Mercedes are the second fastest car on the grid at the moment. And it doesn't sound too stupid of what he's saying, because if you actually look at it on the face of things, Ferrari have struggled in the opening races, and so have Red Bull. McLaren have been the ones that have kind of made gains, and so have Mercedes, with obviously the troubles of Ferrari and Red Bull. And especially when you have a driver of George Russell's talent and pedigree, especially with Russell learning off Lewis Hamilton for a couple of seasons before Hamilton made the switch to Ferrari. It's showing now, and it's bearing fruits for Mercedes, that they have a trustworthy guy that can pick up the pieces, and that can potentially get podiums and race victories week in, week out. And it's obviously his second podium on the bounce. And it's like you mentioned, it's not a stupid idea for him to be an outsider's bet for the championship, because if McLaren do struggle, do get a few DNFs here and there, and George Russell can pick up the pieces, which he's shown in the last 2 races that he can pick up the pieces. Honestly, he could close in on the McLarens very, very quickly. But with that being said, the McLaren is the quickest car, and it is showing from the last 2 races that they are the pace setters, and if they don't experience any problems, and that they can keep trouble free, they're going to get 1-2s highly likely week in, week out. And F1 is a sport where fans get very bored when you see a period of dominance. Fans got bored when Hamilton was dominated. Fans got bored when Verstappen was dominating. And it could be the same happening when McLaren start dominating. People like variety. And I think George Russell can break that sort of norm and potentially give the fans their money's worth with victories this season. And I'm sure he can do it, because last season he provided us with some fantastic entertainment. And with his new role, I think that he is a good bet to see him get a few victories here and there this season. But this in China definitely maximised everything that he could have, and drove a fantastic weekend. So I've also inclined to give him a 9 out of 10.
Next up is Max Verstappen, qualified for the sprint in second and finished third. Qualified for the Grand Prix in fourth and finished fourth. 8 out of 10, very solid job. He obviously lost a couple of places at the start, and I think he was behind the Ferraris for much of that race. And it looked, to be fair, that he had the fourth quickest car. He looked to be struggling, and didn't seem to be able to make inroads. And then, to finish ahead of both Ferraris on track is a good effort from Verstappen. I think he's played damage limitation in this race. The Red Bull, like I said, didn't seem to be up to pace, particularly in that first stint. Seemed to come alive towards in the second stint, but it was a bad showing for the first half of the race. In the sprint, I thought he'd done really well. He done all he could to hold off Piastri, but obviously that McLaren was just too quick in the end. But did hold off both Russell and Leclerc to secure a podium. So it's an 8 out of 10 for me. I thought it was a very solid job, without being sort of incredible, if that makes sense.
It's the Max Verstappen effect. I've given him a 9. I've gone with the same rating as Russell. And I think that Max Verstappen obviously doesn't have the same car that George Russell has. I think, arguably speaking, George Russell does have a quicker car to Max Verstappen because we're obviously seeing both the Red Bull drivers struggling. Liam Lawson obviously jumping into the Red Bull seat, doesn't know what he's got himself into. And it's even Max Verstappen is finding it hard to keep up with the two McLarens, George Russell, and even the two Ferraris. But less about the Ferraris, the better, I think, for this weekend. But I think he just drove his race. Max Verstappen is a driver of cool and calmness and collectedness, and he just did what he needed to do. Yes, he didn't get a podium. He got a podium in the sprint, which makes up for not getting a podium in the race. And obviously gains him more valuable points in the championship. He's probably not everybody's bet for the championship now, purely down to the nature of the car. Um, but it's just Max Verstappen doing Max Verstappen things. He's not in the quickest car, but he's still finishing on track in the sprint and in the race ahead of the Ferraris and ahead of the two Mercedes drivers. So, you know, it swings and roundabouts for Red Bull at the moment, and I think Max Verstappen is feeling that sort of nervousness in the team. But Max Verstappen can only do as much as he can. He's not going to get victories. I don't think we like he did last season, where he got, I think, was it 7 victories in the first half of the season or something stupid like that. Um, I don't think he's going to replicate that. The two McLarens are just too quick, and I think the Mercedes and Ferrari cars are also very quick, but they've got issues of their own. But he's just doing Max Verstappen things, and the man can the man can do abnormal things in that Red Bull, even though it's not that quick. So I've given him a 9 out of 10. It's a deserved grade because that Red Bull seems to be what Aston Martin is doing, and it's beginning to be a sinking ship after Adrian Newey's departure. But it's hard for Max Verstappen. He did what he did, and I think it's a deserved 9 out of 10.
Moving on next to Esteban Ocon. He qualified for the sprint in 18th and finished 16th, qualified for the race in 11th, and finished 5th. Now, this is the easiest 10 out of 10 ever. Obviously, even without the 2 disqualifications for the Ferrari and a P7 finish, it's a 10 out of 10. Absolutely sensational drive. And he wasn't too far off Verstappen, I think it was, in that first stint. He seemed to be the leading midfield car for most of that race. Haas got the strategy down to a T, and maybe there's a little bit more performance in that car than we thought. It seems they've just taken a while to get to grips with the car, and they're struggle to figure it out. But maybe this is a positive sign, and they can start to move forward. We'll talk about his teammate in a minute because he was also sensational. But I thought Esteban Ocon, take a bow, P5, easy 10 out of 10.
Yeah, it's you know the way you said easy 10 out of 10. It's reminiscing back to, was it 2023 when Esteban Ocon got that podium in Monaco, and I think I disagreed with you at that point. But this time around, I'm not going to disagree with you. With a P5 finish in the race, fending off the likes of Kimi Antonelli in a Mercedes, Alex Albon in a rejuvenated Williams' car. It's the easiest 10 out of 10, I think, ever. And I think with Esteban Ocon, we were thinking that that car, that Haas team were pretty much dead and buried after pre-season testing. And I think especially after Australia, they didn't have the best of showings. But in China, it looked like they flipped the switch and they turned instead of the chassis from 2023, they had the chassis from 2024, and it bared fruits for them, reversing to settings of last year instead of 2 years ago where they were absolutely abysmal. And with Esteban Ocon, he's shown when I think they were doing an interview in the pen with F1 TV, him and Ollie Behrman, and it shows that those two actually have a really good camaraderie. There's actually clear understanding between the two of them. It could have been put on for the media, for all I know. I don't care, because Esteban Ocon, I think, is the team leader in that team. He will be the team leader. He is the more experienced driver. But I think that Ollie Behrman can learn a lot from this Chinese weekend from Esteban Ocon because it's shown that anything can happen. If you're in it to win it, you have to be there. And Esteban Ocon did exactly that. So P5 finish and a well deserved 10 out of 10.
Absolutely. On now to Kimi Antonelli. He started the sprint in seventh and finished seventh, qualified for the main race in eighth and finished sixth. It's a 7 out of 10 for me for Kimi Antonelli. It's a decent performance. He's bringing home some points for Mercedes, but he maybe didn't hit the heights that people thought he would after a very, very impressive opening weekend in Australia. I think he got caught in a little bit of traffic. I think a couple of cars done the undercut on him, and he struggled in a bit of dirty air. Struggled to make overtakes, which wasn't unique to him. I think a lot of drivers struggled overtaking, especially with the dirty air and sort of the effect it had on the cars. But as it is, it's a 7 out of 10, solid, but not hitting the heights of last weekend.
Yeah, I'm also inclined to give Kimi Antonelli a 7 out of 10. I don't know whether it was for this race or who got driver of the day for Australia. Was it Lando? It was Lando, wasn't it?
Lando, and then Kimi Antonelli got it for this weekend, which I should actually mention because we said we disagreed with it in Australia. We should also mention that I definitely disagree with it for China. I thought Esteban Ocon was a shoo-in for it. Not sure about what you think of that.
Yeah, that's why I've mentioned it because I saw it on Facebook and I was gonna bring it up. So it was this weekend in China that's just gone that you got driver of the day. Yeah, I'm gonna join with you on that one. I completely disagree with it. This driver of the day frenzy. It's because people can vote. Like, you know what? You need to give some credibility to maybe some journalists or something, or some people of actual F1 knowledge, because clearly Kimi Antonelli's kind of target audience decided to big him up and give him driver of the day instead of Esteban Ocon, who did a fantastic job and secured P5 for Haas. Um, I'm inclined to agree with you on Kimi Antonelli. I've also given him a 7 out of 10. Obviously, it didn't hit the similar heights that he did in Australia, but then again, he qualified very very poorly and had to make up places. And in China, he was just kind of stuck in the bottom half of the top 10. Um, it was okay, but it didn't hit the heights of Australia, and he was caught in traffic, like you said, and his overall performance was okay. Not the standards that kind of Mercedes would have been hoping from him. But it's all right. It's more points in Mercedes's Constructors' Championship bank, and some more valuable points in Kimi Antonelli's hunt for the driver's title in 2025. Will he get it? Nah, I think he won't. His teammate is more likely to get it. But it was a good weekend. It was a good weekend for Kimi Antonelli.
Next up is Alex Albon. He qualified for the sprint in ninth and finished 11th, qualified for the race in 10th and finished seventh. And it's a 9 out of 10. I thought it was another very, very strong showing for Alex Albon. Williams now have as many points as they did last season, following the first two races this season. And I thought it could have actually been more. I thought Albon was unlucky in the sprint. Maybe he could have got a point or two there, but it wasn't to be. But finished ninth and then got two places inherited because of disqualifications. But I thought he was very, very strong. He eked those mediums out so far where not many other drivers could, and then pit for the hards, and it all worked out in his favour. He had the tyres to really attack and make a fair few overtakes with the tyre delta, and he didn't seem to struggle with the overtakes in that sense. It would have been even more comfortable if everybody else stuck to the two stopper instead of pivoting to the one stop, but it wasn't to be. But still, a very good showing and a P7 result because of it, because of those disqualifications. So it's definitely a 9 out of 10.
Yeah, I've gone with a 9 out of 10 as well. Is Alex Albon turning into the next tyre whisperer? That is the question. There's a lot of drivers that are on the grid that are good at whispering to their tyres. We've obviously seen what George Russell could do at the Belgian Grand Prix last season, apart from his disqualification. And Alex Albon has done it a few times. He did it. Was it in Australia last season where he eked those hard tyres out? It
I think
was,
it was the
wasn't it?
season before. So I think it was
23.
2023 where
Yeah,
he done 57 out of 58 laps or something on hard tyres.
yeah, because obviously was it a red flag at the start of 23? I think it was, wasn't it? I can't quite remember. I'm
No, he
not.
had to pit. He had to pit on the last lap. I think it was just a plain race.
Yeah,
He had to pit on the last lap, and there was loads of people in the pit lane because of it.
yeah, you're right. You're right. But yeah, another good weekend for Alex Albon, and he's sort of shown why Williams have kept him as a valuable asset. And he's showing Carlos Sainz that he's certainly not a pushover. He's certainly not a man that's defeated. Oh, Carlos Sainz coming to Williams, I should be scared. Alex Albon's taking it on the chin and doing what he can do best, finishing in the points and a very good finish in P7. So yeah, I've also gone with a 9 out of 10 for Alex Albon, and it's kind of showing us Alex Albon of old, Alex Albon of 2023, and not the Alex Albon of 2024. So I'm glad to see it from Albon, and hopefully he can keep up with it and show the resurgence of Williams is well and truly back on.
Next up is Ollie Behrman. He qualified for the sprint in 12th and finished 15th, qualified for the Grand Prix in 17th and finished 8th. And it's 10 out of 10. Excellent performance from Behrman. Again, he was one of those who went very, very long on their first stint and then pit towards the end, really made the most of it, made a fair few brilliant overtakes and finished in 10th as well. Starting all the way down in 17th, that is a brilliant effort, especially in his second Grand Prix, because it seemed to be a very, very tough race with the tyres and the difficulties overtaken. So I thought he'd done a tremendous job there. And again, like I said, for Albon and for Antonelli and for Ocon, inherited those two places because of the disqualifications. But I think he would have been thereabouts for a 10 out of 10 regardless. If it wasn't for Esteban Ocon stealing the headlines by finishing fifth, then I think Ollie Behrman for getting some decent points on his second ever race is right up there for driver of the day as well. And it goes to show he's got the pace to deliver. He had a disappointing weekend last weekend in Australia, but he's got the pace and he's showing it.
Oliver Behrman, Oliver Behrman. Yeah, agreed. 10 out of 10. Arguably my second favorite driver on the grid at the moment behind Charles Leclerc. Obviously, part of a Ferrari driver academy. I don't know whether he still is. I don't think he is because he signed with Haas. Do
No,
you
I
think
think
he
he is.
signed?
I'm pretty sure he's still part is or there's something there.
And there
Because
must be
obviously
something in
Haas
his
has got the Ferrari
contract.
engine and they've had
Yeah,
Ferrari juniors in the past.
yeah. So yeah, okay. But it doesn't matter though. 10 out of 10 for Ollie Behrman. I'm just so happy. I'm filled with positivity for Ollie Behrman because we obviously saw him at Silverstone. He didn't have a fantastic race NF2 at Silverstone, and I'm just glad that he's reaping the rewards of him progressing into Formula One, and getting his first points for his new team. Well, technically second points if you want to count it, but first points in his debut campaign for Haas. Um, Inherited the two places obviously from the two Ferraris, but without a shadow of a doubt, deserved his points finishing place. Um, yeah, I'm gonna stop because I'm just gonna overfill with too much positivity. But I'm really happy for Ollie Behrman. Did a fantastic job coming from P17 to finish in P8. And what we said to Kimi, what we said about Kimi Antonelli last week when he finished as high as fifth. Was it fifth or fourth? I think it was fourth, wasn't it, for Kimi Antonelli in Australia. The same applies here for Ollie Behrman. So a well-deserved 10 out of 10 for the rookie. And hopefully many more things to come from rookies up and down the grid because all of them have had a very, very good start to life in Formula One.
Next up is Lance Stroll, qualified for the sprint in 10th and finished ninth, qualified for the race in 14th and finished ninth. Picks up 2 points as well because of those disqualifications, as we mentioned a number of times. I've gone for it though for a 6 out of 10. I think he was definitely a lot slower than Fernando Alonso up until the retirement. Maybe I'm being a little bit harsh with a 6. Maybe a 7's more appropriate, but I'm going to stick with a 6. Um, a lot slower than Alonso. Maybe unlucky in the sprint because obviously it was Norris that took the last point from him after he ran in eighth for majority of it. But I thought he was some way off Behrman as well. He obviously went very, very long on the hard tyres, and I think he showed everybody that a one stop was possible. Then it just didn't seem like he had a whole lot of pace on the mediums on the second stint. So yeah, it's a disappointing one for that in that sense that you couldn't finish higher. But a couple of points, I'm sure he won't be too unhappy with that.
Yeah, I think you've gone harsh with a 6. Have gone with a 7 for Lance Stroll. Uh, the biggest stat of the day. He's not finished outside the top 10 in any of the races he's competed in. Have that as a stat for Lance Stroll. I know we like to slander.
This season.
Yeah, yeah, this season. Did I not say this season? I think I mentioned this season. Did I not?
No, you didn't.
Okay, this season. This season, he's not finished outside the top 10 in any of the races he's participated in, which is the Australia race, the China sprint, and the China race. So think about it, three races, and he's not finished outside the top 10. But then again, he's inherited two places from the two Ferraris. So swings and roundabouts. But I think it's a 7 out of 10 performance for Lance Stroll. I think, obviously, like we mentioned for most of these drivers, you've got to be in it to win it, and you've got to be there to benefit from positions. And obviously, he's benefited from the two positions the two Ferraris gave him, and obviously saw his teammate retire. So he picked up some valuable points for Aston Martin. Um, and had a good weekend overall. Wasn't amazing, wasn't outstanding. It was just good. So I've settled with a 7 out of 10 for Lance Stroll.
And the last point scorer, Carlos Sainz, qualified for the sprint in 13th and finished 17th. Qualified for the race in 15th and finished 10th. And I got to say, without those disqualifications, it would have been a pretty miserable weekend for Carlos Sainz. Outperformed by Albon all weekend, and then he couldn't make any inroads in the sprint. He actually lost a fair few places. A better showing in qualifying, but still 5 places behind his teammate. And then he was thereabouts. But I think those cars coming through with the fresher tyres caught him off guard a little bit, and he was a bit he had nothing to fight with. But still, gets a point because of those disqualifications. You know, you got to stay within the rules. So it's a 6 out of 10 from me. Solid, but you know, there's definitely room for improvement for someone of his quality.
Yeah, and I'm actually inclined to agree with you on a 6 out of 10 for Carlos Sainz. It's a little bit meh if you look at it on the face of things because um, you expect a lot of good things from Carlos Sainz, and when you see him qualify 13th for the sprint and obviously finish a long way back in 17th in the sprint, and then you see him qualify in 15th for the race and finish in 10th and for the obviously in the Grand Prix. On the face of things, when you look at what Alex Albon did, it's not great, especially with Carlos Sainz's experience and know-how. But then again, he's another driver that's going to get used to, that's trying to get used to a new car. and I'm sure he's going to figure things out very, very soon. But yeah, the Chinese Grand Prix just wasn't it for him. Uh, Obviously gains his first points for Williams, but if you look at it, he's 15 points behind his teammate after two races. And you're thinking, right, something's going off here. But he's probably just getting himself acclimatized to the car and get himself sort of getting himself used to the car. So yeah, it's a 6 out of 10. It's an okay performance, but I'm sure that he'll get used to that car very, very soon.
Next up is Isaac Hadjar. He qualified for the sprint in 15th and finished 13th. Qualified for the race in 7th and finished 11th. I've gone for a 7 out of 10 for Isaac Hadjar. I thought it was a very, very good performance. It was a strong performance that he needed after the disappointment last weekend. But it should have been he could have easily finished in the points on track. RB completely messed up his strategy with that second pit stop. Nobody else. I think there were 5 cars in total that done a two-stopper. RB's strategy team, need to be sacked because I'm going to repeat my point when it comes to Tsunoda because these guys have been absolutely hung out to dry with shoddy decision making. And then Hadjar tried to fight his way through the field as best he could. Obviously, Jack Doohan caused a lot of issues for him. He couldn't seem to get past him, and there were a number of occasions that Doohan actually overstepped the mark and got a 10-second penalty as a result. And in the end, he actually only finished 2.5 seconds behind Carlos Sainz. You think about how much time he would have lost behind Doohan for about 10, 15 laps. The fact he only finished that far behind Sainz for the last point scoring place, obviously he didn't know it at the time, is good going, is very good going from him. He should have points in Formula One at this point, but by means outside of his control, he doesn't. So lots of positives to take, a good fight back, and obviously qualified 7th ahead of his teammate. So a lot of positives to take for Isaac Hadjar.
I agree with you on the 7 out of 10 given for Isaac Hadjar, and I'm also going to give him a 7 out of 10 because if you actually look like you mentioned, his obviously sprint isn't. It was his SQ1 was great. He finished in ninth in SQ1. He didn't obviously complete a lap in SQ2, meaning he finished 15th. He made up 2 places to finish 13th in the sprint, and you're thinking, right, he's gonna ramp up as the weekend goes along, as the weekend progresses. In qualifying for the race, uh, in the first session, he finished second, and you're thinking, right, here we go. The racing balls are clearly on it, and they have been since the start. Well, it's in Australia and in China. In the second session in qualifying, he was fourth, and then obviously in the final in Q3, he finished seventh. And you're thinking he's on for points. And it's disappointing that he didn't get points. But like you mentioned, the RB team, the RB strategists, everybody in the team, get sacked. Just do one. The guy deserves points, and he didn't get them because you essentially screwed him of a chance of getting any real points. And I'm sure there's probably been debriefs in the racing balls as we speak. But again, he should have had points, and he should have been finishing in the points with how well he did in qualifying, and he deserved it. Like you mentioned, he was stuck behind Jack Doohan for a long, long time. And Jack Doohan, well, deservedly got a penalty for overstepping the mark. But Jack Doohan can get a penalty. It still doesn't give Isaac Hadjar any points. So all in all, it's a 7 out of 10. But it could have been well more, and we could have been talking about Isaac Hadjar points if it wasn't for RB's mistakes and Jack Doohan being, Jack Doohan.
Liam Lawson next. He qualified for the sprint in 20th and finished 14th. Qualified for the race in 20th and finished 12th. It's a 3 out of 10 from me. Very, very, very poor weekend from Liam Lawson. He made inroads in both the sprint and the feature race. However, he's in a Red Bull. Max Verstappen finished second and fourth this season. And and he didn't make inroads at the rate you would expect somebody in one of the top cars. Um, there's obviously a lot of rumors around him coming into the Japanese Grand Prix. I think that's absolutely absurd. He's had a difficult two races, but he's had two races. Let's not forget, he only had, what, 10, 11 races before this season in Formula One. So he's not exactly an experienced driver. Red Bull should have anticipated that there'll be a bedding in period, there'll be a learning process. That Red Bull is probably the most unique car on the grid in terms of operating style. Max Verstappen has a very unique way of driving, and the car is tailored around him, as it should be. He's a four-time world champion, and that's for a reason. So it's going to take time to get to grips with that. And I think swapping Liam Lawson and Yuki Tsunoda would be a massive mistake. They've made the decision. They need to stick with it. They need to have the guts to say, no, we trust our decision. We trust in the long term. This is the right decision, because now they're just going to look like fools. And I know they own both teams, so they can do what they want. But Liam Lawson has shown he's a capable driver. He might not be as good as Yuki Tsunoda. I think that's something that is debatable. Obviously, Tsunoda got sort of snubbed for Lawson for that Red Bull seat coming into this season. But I don't know what the point is in dropping him after two races. But we'll get onto that. Difficult weekend for Lawson. He should be scoring points in a race like this when four cars haven't finished, including two Ferraris and two cars who would be fighting for points positions in Alonso and Gasly. So disappointing weekend, and he really needs to step it up and find some confidence in that car.
You've gone for a three. I've actually gone for a bit higher. I've gone for a 5 out of 10. I think it's a little bit of injustice for Liam Lawson. Like we've mentioned, he's found it very, very hard. But he's obviously qualifying at the back of the grid, but he's still able to make inroads, if you get what I mean. You mentioned that he's not been able to do it as quick as he can. Um, but he's going to find it very, very hard. That second Red Bull car is pretty much what Max Verstappen is what Max Verstappen is dealing with in the first car. That car that Red Bull have is fine tuned to Max Verstappen and no one else. Like you mentioned, there's obviously speculations going around about Liam Lawson already being dropped by Red Bull and Yuki Tsunoda jumping into the Red Bull seat, and it's ludicrous. It's absolutely mental. They have to own the they have to own the decision they made. And obviously, we were on about it in previous podcast episodes regarding Liam Lawson, obviously Yuki Tsunoda, that sort of battle, who should get the Red Bull seat, and Red Bull just have to own it. They have to really own it and stick with their guts and stick with their driver. And if they're binning the driver after two races, it just shows that they've given up on him. And he's just not it. But then again, like I mentioned, that Red Bull, both the cars are fine-tuned to Max Verstappen and no one else. And I think anybody on the grid would find it hard, apart from a certain Mr. Daniel Ricciardo, who I reckon who'd do a reasonable enough job, but he's going to be nowhere near that seat. I don't think he's. It's pretty much between the Red Bull junior drivers. And for Liam Lawson, I'll go back to him. It's hard, but he's able to make up places. He's not finished in the points yet for Red Bull, which obviously is very disappointing. And Red Bull obviously need points in their championship bids. But it's going to be hard for Liam Lawson, I think. And I think a 3 out of 10 is quite harsh. Because yes, he qualified at the back of the grid. But for a rookie to come into a top team, obviously we've had Kimi Antonelli do extraordinary things at Mercedes. But Mercedes is not Max Verstappen racing, is it? Let's be real. So it's going to be hard for Liam Lawson. It was hard for Pierre Gasly. It was hard for Alex Albon. It was hard for Sergio Perez. Anybody who gets that seat, it will be hard for them. So yeah, it was a disappointing weekend. But I think there's plenty of positives that Liam Lawson can take from it, especially with his racecraft and his race pace. They looked very, very good. But his qualifying does need to improve, and he really needs to finish in the points sooner rather than later.
Jack Doohan next qualified for the sprint in 16th and finished the race in 20th. Qualified for the feature race in 18th and finished 13th. 4 out of 10 from me. I can't really say too much else. I thought he looked all right. He actually outqualified Pierre Gasly in the sprint, and wasn't too far behind in the main qualifying. But it's just his racecraft is maybe a step behind. I think he actually punted Bortoleto at the end of the sprint race, and then obviously had that incident with with Hadjar, sorry, which on the face of it, at the time you thought it was for 14th place. You didn't think much of it, but because of those three cars got retired, that was actually for 11th place. So yeah, I think because of that 10-second penalty, because he overstepped the mark, he didn't give himself a shot. But I think that there's more positives to take this weekend than last weekend. I think he's got something to work with now, a bit of something to build off of. Like Isaac Hadjar, like we said, he's got good foundation to build off for future races, and that's what Doohan has. And if he wants to stick out the season, obviously there's been a lot of speculation. If he wants to stick the season out, this has got to be sort of a building point. Even though he finished some way behind his teammate before we got disqualified.
Yeah, I think this driver deserves a 3 out of 10. Jack Doohan, it's obviously his performance levels are better than what happened in Australia in his opening race of his opening campaign for Alpine. Obviously retiring after lap one. But what he did, especially with Gabriel Bortoleto and with Isaac Hadjar, it reminds me of a certain man whose initials start with an M. And I know the exact driver that I know you know, and I know that everybody knows which driver I'm on about. And I know it's hard, but then again, Jack was doing his best in his capabilities to keep the driver behind, if you get what I mean. But obviously, some of those tactics aren't, legal, and that's why he got the penalty. And obviously, what happened between him and Gabriel Bortoleto was also very, very funny. But yeah, it's a 3 out of 10. I think for Jack Doohan, he outqualified Pierre Gasly. Great, yeah, fantastic. But he actually has to maximize everything. He's probably the biggest driver out of all the rookies, alongside probably Liam Lawson that's on the chopping block. And he's really got to maximize everything, and he's got to really keep it clean. Probably not too clean. He can have his elbows out, but to legal means. So yeah, I've settled with a 3 out of 10. It was some of the moves were a little bit rash, but that maybe just be me being me and overreacting a little bit. But I think with some of the moves on Hadjar and Bortoleto were just a little bit, a little bit too much.
Gabriel Bortoleto up next, qualified for the sprint in 14th and finished 18th, qualified for the race in 19th and finished 14th. I've gone for a 6 out of 10. A good performance from Bortoleto. He outqualified Hulkenberg in, I think it was the sprint. Yeah, he did. Got through to SQ2, and there was a moment that he could look like troubling the front runners to get into SQ3. He obviously had that incident at the start of the race, which completely ruined any chances of moving up. Dropped to the back of the field. But what was actually quite impressive, I thought, he was almost 30 seconds adrift of his teammate, who also had a little moment. And somebody who we've praised a lot over the last year and a half, Nico Hulkenberg, and he caught up with him and he beat him in the race. That I think is exceptional stuff to do that in the way that he did. To go from 30 seconds behind and end up beating Hulkenberg was a good effort. Again, the race pace seemed to be improving. I think we can maybe see a little bit more of what he's about now that he's in the dry, because obviously the wet wasn't really the moment to see what his race pace is actually looking like. But 6 out of 10 and impressive. Let's see what he can bring in the coming week.
Yeah, so I've gone with a 5 out of 10 for Gabriel Bortoleto. And I think it is an impressive display for Gabriel Bortoleto. Obviously in Australia he was in the rain and and whatnot, and obviously DNF'd after his little spin and off he went. But obviously completed his first ever race in Formula One, and I think he was good. He was relatively good when it came to his race pace, and he obviously beat his teammate in the sprint qualifying, and in a race he finished ahead of him on track. So I don't think I can add much more. He was obviously the better of the two Sauber cars when it came to the race and the sprint. Um, but yeah, I think it wasn't the best of showings for Sauber by a long stretch. And kind of Gabriel Bortoleto just did what he could and finished in the place that he could. So yeah, I think it was a 5 out of 10. I think it was a decent display.
Nico Hulkenberg next, and he qualified for the sprint in 19th and finished 19th, qualified for the race in 12th and finished 15th. Now, I've gone for a 4 out of 10. I'm debating a 3 out of 10, to be honest, because it is a very, very poor performance from start to finish from Nico Hulkenberg. You compare Bortoleto and Hulkenberg, and they've had complete opposite weekends. Um, I think for someone of Nico Hulkenberg's experience, you do expect a bit more. And this comes off, like I said, the last 18 months, we've done nothing but actually praise Nico Hulkenberg for how well he's doing in a car which maybe wasn't the best, particularly in 2023. But this just was not his weekend at all. He got completely overshadowed by his teammate, who beat him in every single session, I think it was, apart from the Grand Prix qualifying. But then Hulkenberg had the moment at the start and basically wrote off his entire race. And then got beaten on track by his teammate as well. So I think it's a very poor race, and I think that Bortoleto deserves a much higher grade than him.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree. I'm gonna agree on a 3 out of 10 for Nico Hulkenberg. Very uncharacteristic from him to not even get it out of SQ1. And then I believe he made it into Q2, but did he? I think he started. Was it 12th that he started in the race, and
Yeah,
obviously
it
finished
was.
behind his teammate. So you know it's very much swings and roundabouts for Nico Hulkenberg in China. And he just didn't get a break, really, did he? Finished behind his teammate, kind of compounds his weekend of a bit of a dismal weekend for him when it came to China. But it's obviously the second race of the season, and you can only say that the only way is up after a good Australia. He's had a bit of a dip in China, and hopefully he bounces back in Japan.
The last of the finishers up next in Yuki Tsunoda qualified for the sprint in eighth and finished sixth. Qualified for the race in ninth and finished 16th. I'm going to repeat what I said for Isaac Hadjar. The strategy team at RB need to be fired. They need to be held accountable because they have absolutely ruined Sonoda, who was in a very good position. I think he was around about the lead of the midfield cars. He was running in the points comfortably. And they've absolutely bottled it. Like I said, there were only one of two of five cars that did the two stopper. And it's not good enough for them. And you look at the sprint when there was no pit stops, no strategy at all, just flat out for 19 laps, and he finished sixth. He picked up some points. So I don't want to think about how many points he would be on this season already if RB's strategy team just didn't exist and they wrote their own strategy because it might be better at this point. So I've gone for an 8 out of 10. Very good performance and massively unlucky.
I've gone for a grade lower. I've gone for a 7 out of 10. But yeah, I agree with you. It's like we're repeating ourselves because we are with RB. It's the same thing has happened to two of their drivers. And it's unlucky that instead of Yuki Tsunoda having probably double figures in points, he's only got three on the board. It's very, very humbling to know that because of your team and your strategy team putting you in the dust and in the muck, you've only got 3 points and not 10 or 10 plus points in the championship, and he could be sitting comfortably inside the top 10 of the drivers' championship. Instead, he's behind Oliver Behrman, who's collected 4 points from a race last weekend. So it's another driver where it swings and roundabouts. He had a very, very good sprint, but the race, like you mentioned, it was just very dismal, and his team should be held accountable for what they did to both of the cars, not just Isaac Hadjar, but Yuki Tsunoda. But yeah, I've given Yuki Tsunoda a 7 out of 10. It was a good display, and it could have been an even greater, better display were it not for the RB strategy team, who, like you mentioned, definitely need to get fired or at least held accountable for what they did.
On to the measures. Gasly first, qualified for 17th and finished 12th, qualified for the race in 16th and was disqualified after finishing 11th on track. I've gone for a 6 out of 10. A good performance, I thought. For these next three cars, I'm not going to really judge them on the disqualification because it's such fine margins that it really made no improvement at all. Like we said about George Russell, we gave him a 10 out of 10 for Belgium last year when his car was slightly underweight. It made no difference over the course of a Grand Prix. It is really, really minimal, but the rules are there. They've got to be upheld. Otherwise, where would the sport be? So I've given him a 6 out of 10, Pierre Gasly. Very solid. But maybe he should have really been finishing in the points position on track. Not that it mattered in the end anyway.
Yeah, I agree with you on Pierre Gasly. I've also given him a 6 out of 10. It's just one of them with disqualifications. We'll talk about the two Ferraris next, I'm pretty sure. But I think it was his car, similar to Charles Leclerc's car, was underweight, wasn't it? Him and Charles was underweight, and then I believe it was Lewis Hamilton's skid block that was found not was it point 0.5 of a millimeter too thin or something like that. It's just rules at the end of the day. Rules are there to be adhered by and not broken. And it's what happens. It's fine margins. But like you mentioned, finish 11th on track. I think he should be finishing inside the points, especially with who he had in front of him. But yeah, it's fine margins, and it doesn't really matter if he finished inside the points because they would have been wiped because of his disqualification. So it is what it is, and it's a 6 out of 10.
We'll move on to the Ferraris now. So Charles Leclerc coming up first. He qualified for the sprint in fourth and finished fifth. Qualified for the race in sixth and was disqualified after finishing fifth on track. I've gone for a 7 out of 10. It was solid, but I think he done exceptionally well in the race itself to show the pace he had. Because I tell you what, that incident at the start could have been very, very messy. The fact that he hasn't actually had to have that front wing replaced and pit immediately, as well. He's made contact with Lewis Hamilton's right rear. That could have easily given him a puncture. So then you could have both Ferraris having to pit at the end of lap one. They were in fourth and fifth. They both jumped Verstappen at the start. And then to drop down right to the back, having had to have both cars pit. So it spared his blushes a little bit. And then he showed very, very good pace and was able to get the pace out of the car when maybe Hamilton wasn't in the race. So good effort from him. 7 out of 10.
And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pair the two Ferraris together. So for Charles, I've gone for same as you. I've gone for a 7, and then for Lewis Hamilton, I've gone for an 8 out of 10, purely because of his sprint performance and his sprint pole and his sprint win. I've given him a grade higher, even though he finished behind Leclerc on track in the race. Yeah, in the sprint, obviously Lewis had the upper hand. He started on pole and won the sprint, so he's obviously going to take the upper hand of the weekend, heading into the race because of his victory. But then in the race, I think Charles Leclerc had the upper hand. Like you mentioned, the two Ferrari cars jumped Verstappen, but then obviously Verstappen was able to pass again, and the two Ferraris finished in fifth and sixth before the disqualification. Um, Very, very unlucky, just like Pierre Gasly. But like you mentioned, I don't think we can base their performances on the disqualification because it's so fine margins, and we can just purely judge them on the racing on track and what happened. and I think Lewis Hamilton slightly edges it for me because of his victory in the sprint. I did mention at the start of the episode that you've got to take the sprint as a pinch of salt, but I think to get your first Ferrari pole and your first Ferrari victory, if you want to call it that, because it's a sprint, is just brilliant. And I think many Ferrari fans were happy with his display and to see him finish on the top step of the podium once again. So yeah, I've gone with Lewis Hamilton. Charles Leclerc 7 out of 10, and Lewis Hamilton 8 out of 10.
And that is what I've given Lewis Hamilton. I've given him an 8 out of 10. So he qualified for the sprint in first and finished first. I just want to make that very clear that he finished first in the sprint, and then qualified for the race in fifth and was disqualified after finishing sixth on track. Yeah, it is an 8 out of 10 for Lewis Hamilton for me. I think you've got to, in this circumstance, give a bit of extra weight into the sprint. And it wasn't exactly close in the end. It was close for about the first half. It was I think the gap from Hamilton to Verstappen was sitting between about 1.6 and 2 seconds. And then when, Piastri and Verstappen were having their battle, Hamilton started to eke out that advantage. And in the end, it was 7 seconds. I think maybe the two of them took a little bit too much out of their tyres, battling with each other. And Hamilton looked after us brilliantly and was able to have a comfortable sprint win. And that is just about where the good ends for Hamilton for the Chinese Grand Prix. A disappointing qualifying to be fifth and sixth with both cars after winning the sprint. And, Leclerc also had a very strong showing in the sprint. But it's the fine margins, isn't it, for both of them? I think Leclerc's car was half a kilogram underweight, and Lewis Hamilton's skid plank was 0.05 of a millimeter overworn. So it's minuscule amounts. It really is. It's just a slight miscalculation from Ferrari, but I'm sure they'll bounce back from that and gain these points that they have lost. They are now actually sitting in fifth in the constructors, level on points with Williams, and only 3 ahead of Haas, who we were saying last weekend are gone. They're done. So 8 out of 10 positives to take, but not the results to necessarily back them up. And I forgot that you actually grouped Hamilton and Leclerc together. So moving on now to Fernando Alonso, the last of the runners, qualified for the sprint in 11th and finished 10th, qualified 13th for the race and did not finish. I've gone for a 5 out of 10. Showed good pace, but for reasons outside of his control, he wasn't able to actually finish the race. I think the brakes went at the end, didn't he? But he was much quicker than Stroll up until that retirement. But solid in the sprint, solid up until that point. Maybe he would have been in with a shout of points. We'll never know, though, because he unfortunately had to retire.
You nearly forgot his teammate there, didn't you? I saw you thinking. The brain was ticking over. Who's his teammate again? Who's his teammate? Oh wait, it's Lance Stroll. It's Lance Stroll, but it's teammate. But yeah, I agree with you on Fernando Alonso. I've also given him a 5 out of 10. It's another driver reason out of his control that he had a DNF. And he showed, like you mentioned, he showed very, very good pace. Just wasn't able to finish the race, and obviously wasn't able to benefit from the two Ferrari drivers and Pierre Gasly retiring. Getting disqualified from a race, so he wasn't able to pick up any points. And it's a shame because Fernando Alonso, I believe, currently sits 20th in the Drivers' Championship out of 20 drivers because of his DNF, because of everything that's happening with Aston Martin. And you think about it, Lance Stroll is the leading driver of Aston Martin in the points. Who would have thought that? Who would have thought that? You didn't think that. I didn't think that. Nobody thought that. But it's the reality, unfortunately. So yeah, I've also gone with a 5 out of 10 for Fernando Alonso. Unfortunate. Showed great pace up until his retirement, but wasn't able to make anything of it, unfortunately.
That is all for this episode of On the Grid Podcast. Thank you all for listening along. As we said at the start of the episode, we'll be looking at our predictions and the news and previewing the Japanese Grand Prix next week because we have this week off coming up. Thank you all for listening, as I said, and we'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.